What some of the last things we've discussed has in common, is that there have been hard times coming after good times, which wasn't always expected. In the case of Papua New Guinea at independence, and I was there at independence, there were some places that had misgivings, but in most parts of the country, there was a great deal of optimism. And the sense was things are going to get better. And in many places they did. But they didn't always stay better. And things did change from one place to the next. And there have been crises in many parts of the country that people experience in many different ways. And I think that's certainly true in the area that I work in. And the idea that there'll be smooth sailing from here on in, we just don't know how that's going to work out. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about where things stand, the last time I saw them, at least, in the Telephone area. And what I saw, I've already mentioned the witchcraft murders, which I thought were a really big issue. But I also saw the closure of the Ok-Tedi mine during the El Nino drought, and the fact that the Kabubu became a ghost town pretty much during that time. And people were going through hard times when it had to do with the fate of their gardens and their livelihoods in rural areas. And that wasn't something that anyone had anticipated. And I think most of us can probably, we don't have to imagine it. We can turn on news broadcasts from various other parts of the world too, and see the kinds of things that happen to people that aren't anticipated, but are definitely in the cards for the future. So there's a lesson in that, I think, in some of the stuff that I was looking at. And in the case of Ok-Tedi and its relation to local people, one of the things that I noticed was that the evacuation of Ok-Tedi in the course of the drought was quite dramatic, and the shutdown of the mine was quite dramatic. And there was a period not that much longer afterwards, during the COVID crisis, when there was also a kind of shutdown of the mine. And one of the things that became clear is that the mine management, which had undergone some changes prior to that time, had decided that what they wanted to do, partly because it was convenient because so many of the people who worked at the mine were already out of town. One of the things that they wanted to do was to shift the mine from being a residential mine where you had a live-in community at the town to a fly-in, fly-out mine where you had workers commuting, not necessarily their families being there. And you didn't have the costs of maintaining, infrastructure, medical system, police, and sanitary facilities and that kind of thing, maintaining houses, maintaining plumbing, all those kinds of things. Certainly wouldn't be necessary, and the costs will go down. It's probably important to say that the sole proprietor of that mine is the Papua New Guinea government. So this is a case of the government saying it's going to be in our people's own good if we cut back these services. I surely don't agree with that, and I don't think many people in the Telephone area agree with it either. And the response to the attempts to shift the Ok-Tedi mine completely over to a fly-in, fly-out basis met an awful lot of resistance. I'm not sure that the story on that is finished yet, but the sense of a town that was going to be the anchoring point for the future is kind of in question. And what's tied in with that is that there's another element of the relation of Tabu Bill to people in rural Telephone where I work, which is the member of parliament for the area, a fellow named Solan Mirisim, who is I think, a very good member of parliament. is also minister for, among other things, for highways. There is a highway, gravel highway, that is being built across the mountain range from Ok-Tedi to Telefomin now. It's gotten as far as the south bank of the Sepik River, which is it's an incredible feat that they've managed to do that. And a bridge is going to be built across the river momentarily. On the far side of the bridge, there's already a rural road to connect the air station, or the airstrip at Telefomin, to the riverbank. And it's now the case that rural women who live in the village that's right across from the roadhead can actually cross the river with garden produce, get a public motor vehicle, essentially a bus, drive to Tabubil, sell their market produce, and then come back on the same day instead of spending 3 days walking out and 3 days walking back, or having to hire an airplane or get book passage on a plane to go there. People regard that as an incredible feat, and it really is. But of course, roads only work if they're maintained. And if you don't have the infrastructure there, then the infrastructure just disappears. So I hope to be optimistic about it, but I don't know. There's at least one optimistic conclusion to the story about the witchcraft murders, and not simply that the jail facilities have been expanded to hold anybody who's been arrested, but there are two elements that I thought were very promising. One of them was at a funeral of somebody who died sometime after those incidents that I mentioned. A young fellow showed up with a pistol and attempting to as far as one can tell, accuse somebody among the mourners of being responsible for the death. And the entire party of the mourners turned on him and chased him off, and the police arrested him and confiscated the weapon. So that's a good start. If that had happened earlier on, everybody would be much happier. As important in terms of going forward, people in the area where these murders were most intense were able to put that behind them through one of two things. And one of them was through the good offices of a physician working at the hospital at Tabubil. When told that a young woman in Telefomin had died, and it was being suggested possibly by some people that it might have been witchcraft, he performed an autopsy and he flew to Telefomin to deliver the results of the autopsy himself. She died of a stroke, which turns out to be unfortunately fairly common there. She died of a stroke, and that satisfied the listeners, and all talk of reprisals or making somebody pay for that disappeared, and that was good. Even more recently, some of those who were the victims of the attacks were able to get, if not to compensation, at least able to get some acknowledgement of their suffering and apologies and a reconciliation from the families of those of some of the boys who put them through the awful time that they'd been in. And there were tears, there were hymns, there were songs, and there were prayers afterwards. And that seems to me to have been about the best that they could have hoped for in that situation. That's a helpful kind of thing. There was a volume or a number of the Australian Journal of Anthropology recently about dark anthropology in Papua New Guinea, and it had to do with something that's more widespread in anthropology generally. It's not specific to Papua New Guinea, but the sense that anthropology, at least Anglophone anthropology, I would say probably from about the early 90s forward, has consistently found more and more pessimism, more and more grounds for pessimism in some of the things they're talking about. Now, sometimes it's a matter of simply looking at things that we chose not to take notice of. And the destruction of what plantation agriculture does to the environment, for example, is now becoming pretty well known. It hadn't been before. But there are other things that actually do mark a real deterioration in people's life chances, in hope stashed and that kind of thing. And it's not just in one country or another, many other places. There's a kind of pessimistic mood in a lot of anthropology, and it shows up in the kinds of things that we write about. We write an awful lot about suffering these days, it seems. And so the question about dark anthropology is that an appropriate tack for Papua New Guinea? There's lots of information around of cases where that seems to be appropriate, where there is the darkness of the kind of the witchcraft killings that I have in mind has taken place. Bruce Noft has talked about situations in an area where he works not far from Kiunga and Tabubil, where people who had once been in a situation where they had more services available to them, more chances for employment available to them, find that these things are now dwindling and disappearing, and they're going back to a kind of isolation, to being thrown on their own devices, to the point where partly, I think, as to keep their morale up, and maybe because it really does perform some function, after the government had pulled up stakes and removed their officers, they have their own shadow government with people with the same titles and that kind of thing. They solicit reports. There's no government funding to provide for them. There are no services that they can provide, but they are trying to go through a realization of something that they associate with better times. And that's certainly the kind of thing. It's on one hand tragic, but it shows optimism in bad times, I would say, as well. There are other cases in which perhaps the most dramatic one is in the Porgera area, where there's another large mining project going on.